everyone, it's Elin. As maybe you've seen already, I recently made a video, the books I've read in the past 6 months, part 1, and now I will do part 2, which covers the last 3 months of the last 6 months, even though some time has gone by now, so it's not really the past 6 months, but hopefully you get what I mean, because I'm already confused by this. So if you want to know the part 1 books I've read, check out that video. I will put it somewhere here, I think here, I don't know, but you can find it easily. So let's start with the books I read in February 2020, and I finished 8 books that month. And the first book I finished is a book originally written in Chinese, but I read it in Dutch, and it's called Vette by Koonchung, and it was really interesting. I really recommend it. I'm sure it's also translated into English and many other languages, and it was actually about the regime in China. It's a fiction book. It predicts a bit the future, but it's already quite yeah, of course there are elements that already happen now, and it's really interesting. It's been quite a while now that I've read it, but I just remember that it was really interesting, and that it was about the regime controlling, and then people wanted to revolt, so but they didn't know who to trust, and some of the main characters were followed by detectives and so on. It was really interesting, and especially for someone that has never been to China like me, or that has no clue about how life is there, it was really interesting to know. So I really can recommend that. The second book I read was Wereldwijven by Pénélope Bagieu. So it was originally written in French, but it wasn't a real book with only text. It was also, how do you say that, a comic, like those drawings, but with a lot of text as well. And this actually, the title means ladies of the world, but in Dutch it's the expression like, you know, really cool, fierce, brave, nice ladies. So actually the book told the stories of all types of ladies that had done or were quite interesting at their time. So for example, there was an empress of China, the only one I think. It's been also quite a while now, but there were many. Or also by the actress that did the witch in The Wizard of Oz. Everyone told her she was too ugly to become a famous actress and so on, but then she got that role through working a lot, and then she ended up being a really famous actress, but she always did witch roles. So it was super interesting as well, so check that out. And there's also a second one, but I couldn't find it yet, so I want to read that too. Then the third was also a comic book. It's not really comic because it's a serious topic, but you get what I mean with all the little images. And it was Io sono Maria Callas by Vanna Vinci, and it's I am Maria Callas, the famous opera singer. So it tells her life story and how she became that successful opera singer. And it was also really interesting because of course everyone knows her name and that she's famous, but actually she had a lot of trouble growing up, and it was a hard way getting there, so it's also interesting to know that. Then the fourth book is A ciascuno il suo by Leonardo Sciascia, and this is a famous Italian, Sicilian to be more specific, author. So this is a kind of detective novel, and they are quite short. I've also read another one, and it was nice. And then another Italian book, Per questo mi chiamo Giovanni by Luigi Garlando, and this was also set in Sicily, and it was about a boy that went on a trip with his father, and the father explained to his son why they called him Giovanni, because he was named after a man that actually fought the mafia his whole life and was in lockdown a long period of his life to not be caught by them, to fight against them. So it's actually a book for children, but I mean, I can still read book for children. Officially, I'm still a child. But yeah, it was really interesting, and yeah, I didn't know about this guy Giovanni. I forgot his last name. So that was interesting. And then another Italian book, Le città invisibili by Italo Calvino, and this is also a really famous author, but this is more, this was more a poetic novel. It wasn't really one long story. It was about all kinds of cities, and they made it seem like the perspective of Marco Polo. So he explains all the cities he's seen, but actually they are really imaginary. They are like, oh, the city where everything is upside down, but really well thought, and every story is a different city, and it's so well thought about and explained that you can really imagine all these weird, amazing cities. So I liked reading that. And then one of the #1 ladies detective agency, I'm sure, in the previous video I already talked about this, but it's about ladies, and they have their detective agency, the only detective agency in Botswana. And it's really nice because they always solve the cases by insight in people and by just logic of thinking, and it's really nicely written. It's really warming the heart and just nice. And this was Precious and Grace. It's a whole series, I have it there. So this was this book, and it's by Alexander McCall Smith, and lived there for some years, I think. So he really describes the scenery and so on really nicely. So if you want to travel by your mind in a happy, nice, friendly environment, you can read this series. And then the last book I read that month is Exoplaneten by Joris Janssen, and it's, you guessed it, about exoplanets, which means planets outside of our solar system. And as I've told in some previous videos, I participated in a TEDx event. I also held a TEDx speech. You can, I'll link it here. And there was another lady, an astrophysicist, that talked about, actually about outer space, but also about exoplanets. So that really made me curious about those. So I read this book. It was really tiny, but it explained how they search for them, and then it described several, and then what the future holds, why we are looking for those, and so on. It was really interesting. And then it's March 2020 already, the month of the lockdown, and the month I've finished most books during the past 6 months, 11 books. So the first was Vrouwland by Rachida Lamrabet. And this is a Belgian-Moroccan author, and I really liked this book. It was a story about a lot of things, but it was written, it was almost, how do you say it? It was really poetically written, and there were several parts in the book, and every time it changed viewpoint, so that was really interesting to get to know all the characters better. And it talks about a lot of themes like immigration, feeling at home, but of course also love, friendship, but in a really mature, poetic and amazing way. So that's a really big recommendation. And then I read the famous book by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, and it's a feminist pamphlet in 15 propositions, but I read it in Dutch because that's how I found it at the library. So it's called Lieve Ijeawele or a feminist pamphlet, and yeah, it's 15 ideas on how to raise your children to be feminists and yeah, spreading love and seeing everybody as equal and so on. So that was nice. It's also really short. So. And then I read, this was where I went to the library and just took some feminist books. This was Can We All Be Feminists, edited by June Eric-Udorie. But there were many different writers collaborating, and this was more about can we all be feminist, because all women experience so many different things. Like, it's way different than being a white woman, able-bodied like I am, than being a black woman, or even a trans black woman, or someone who isn't able-bodied. So it's interesting to know about all these different realities and the cross points. So it was more about intersection of feminism, that we shouldn't only cover one type of women, but all women should have a place in feminism and a say in feminism. So that was really interesting. And I read SOS Sex by Goedele Liekens, the most famous sexologist from Belgium, and I think the only famous one, I don't know. But this book with all kinds of questions she frequently gets, and then with her answers. And it was interesting, but it was quite short answers and not such interesting questions, I thought. And it was also heteronormative, like it always talked about male and female, but like at the beginning she says all these things can also be applied to different types of couples, but she just took that for it to make it easier, I guess. But I mean, it's good that she mentions it, but it was still, I mean, I think she could do better, because I read other books by her and they were, so read other books than this. Then another book which was a collaboration by many writers is The Futurist Feminist, and this was, the introduction was by Jessica Valenti, and there were many others participating. This was also really interesting, but I preferred the Can We All Be Feminist because it was more clearly written. In Can We All Be in The Futurist Feminist, it was always like orange and pink letters, so you couldn't read it very well. So Can We All Be Feminist is a better recommendation. Then I read the Italian book Nel mare ci sono I coccodrilli by Fabio Geda, and this is a story that really happened about a little kid that from Afghanistan he flees with his mother, and then she leaves him in another country, and he takes a whole journey by himself to get to Italy in the end. But it's because when he was left he was only 10, so he was just he found himself a job, he got money to go to Oman, I think, and then he went to Turkey, then he went to Greece by boat. Like it was really touching and also sad that these things really happen, but of course we know about this, and I think it's a good way of reading such a book by knowing, well, of course you never know what they feel unless you experience it yourself, but at least you know how difficult it is to get there. So you cannot say when people arrive here in Greece or Italy like go back, because if they would be safe and happy there, of course they would stay in their own country. If they come here, it is because they needed to. So I think we should accept them, and of course I get that not one country can just take all migrants in, but I think we as Europe, we should have a solidarity network and just embracing those people, because I mean, of course there are young kids and so on that it's not their fault, and of all the other people it's not their fault either. They had to flee, and I mean, they can still work and help here. So I think it's good to read those kinds of books, even if they are saddening, because they make you understand a reality very different than ours. So that was nice. Well, not nice, it was a good insight, let's say. Then I read the famous book Max Havelaar by Multatuli, which is a pseudonym for Edward Douwes Dekkers. Fun fact, because we had to read it for Dutch, but we only read some parts of it, like the most important parts. But since I liked it and found it interesting, I read the whole book. And this is about the Dutch colonizing Indonesia and yeah, their regime over there. So this was also quite frustrating to read, like how can you treat people like that? But I think it's also important to know the history, and it's a really well written book, so it's a must read for me. Then I read another one from the #1 Ladies Detective Agency series, The House of Unexpected Sisters. Then I read another Italian book, Io non ho paura by Niccolò Amaniti. And this is also a book for children, but I had read it as a kid, but I didn't remember it very well, so I wanted to reread it. And this is a really good book. It's about kids in the summer and they go cycling all day, and then one of them discovers a secret which is really bad, and he has to handle that and handle his emotions with it. And yeah, it's really well written, so I really can recommend that. Then I read a book in French, No Kid, 40 raisons de ne pas avoir d'enfant by Corinne Mayer. So it's 40 reasons not to have kids, and I got this book for free in France last summer. And yeah, I just found it interesting to read because it also explains a lot about how people without children are viewed like less in society because, you know, they don't contribute to the country. Of course they contribute, but I mean, that's a bit like, it's weird for a couple to not have kids, even though maybe they just don't want them, maybe they can't have them, I don't know. So it has made me think a lot about how we as a society judge people that don't have kids, because it's really seen as normal. Like, also, if as a couple you're in a stable situation and you've been together for a while, oh, what about kids? People ask that all the time. So yeah, I think we should stop that as a society and just let everyone do what they want, and we can have less children and accept migrants, and like that, problem solved. Then I read another Italian book by the same author of previously, Io non ho paura. I don't know if I mentioned his name, but it's Niccolò Amaniti. And then I read Come Dio Comanda by him, and this was also a really good book about a father and a son, but the father, he's always, not always, but he's often drunk and violent, so the kid grows up in a difficult situation, but they still have a strong bond. And then a lot of things happen. You just have to read it to know, but it's really good, so go. And then we are in April 2020, and the first book I read is Niet Alles is Liefde by Rachel Gibson. So this was a translated book originally in English, and this was like a bit of a weird, it's like supposed to be romantic, but it was also quite erotic, but like it's not either one. There was too little erotic scenes for it to be really an erotic book, but yeah, the characters were quite flat and it was just a bit okay, cool story. I don't know. It's not really a recommendation unless you're just like want to read something light and sometimes erotic, then it's a fun book. Then I read the Italian book Io e te è grammaticalmente scorretto by McCall Smith. And this was about, of course, two teenagers and they are friends and she helps him with his schoolwork, but he doesn't seem to understand her true feelings towards him. And then, drama, but then of course it ends well. It was a bit of a silly book, but I enjoyed it more the previous times I read it. In my memory it was a nicer book, but actually it was a bit, unless you like that type of books, of course. Then I read the Dutch book De Passievrucht by Karel Glastra van Loon, which was a really nice book. This is also considered literature. And it's about a man who discovers that his son isn't his son. No, actually he discovers that his sperm cells aren't alive, actually. I don't know how you say it, but I mean, he cannot biologically get kids, but he has a 13-year-old son. So of course that isn't his son, but his wife with whom he had the son died some years ago, so he can't even ask her who the actual father was. So then the whole book goes about that, but it was a really nice book and I didn't expect the ending, so you can read it. Then I read The Prophet by Khalil Gibran, and this is also really poetically written, and it was just nice to read. Then I read another Italian book, Italiani, per esempio, l'Italia vista dai bambini immigrati by Giuseppe Calicetti. And this is, I think something fell, but... And this book is about Italy from the viewpoint of immigrant kids. So it's really nice because you really see the words of children from like 5 to 13. So it's really nice to see their viewpoint on the world and on Italy and Italians and their habits. And they also explain their own cultures and everything, so it's really nice. For example, one thing that I really remembered well is that a girl said, oh, Italy is really a nice place, but if they would keep it cleaner, it would be even nicer. So that really stuck by me because it shows that it is so evident that we have to care for our world. Like, everyone can see that, but why don't we do it? So please, I'll put it here. I made a video about easy things you can do to be sustainable at home, so check that out and do something for this girl that wants a nicer world, and also for this girl, please. And I read a book which can be considered an erotic book, namely Little Birds by Anaïs Nin. And when I told my dad I was reading this, he said, oh yeah, it's a classic. So okay, I discovered that, and I liked some of the short stories that were in it, but some I thought were a bit weird. But I mean, of course people are free to do what they want, but some I didn't like. But you can always try reading it. Then I finished Homo Deus, A Brief History of Tomorrow by Yuval Noah Harari. And of course, very, very interesting, insightful, well written, well explained. So all those 3 books of his, you should really read them. They are my top books, 2 non-fiction books that everyone should read, so do that. Then I read the French book Les 4 Saisons de l'été by Grégoire de la Cour, and I really liked this one too because it had several perspectives, like several stories, and then in the end they all intertwine. And yeah, it's a really nice book. And then another one by the #1 ladies detective. I didn't have enough space, so I quickly deleted some stuff, but as I was saying, the last book I read in April was The Colors of All the Cattle from the #1 Ladies Detective Agency series. So that was it for this video. I hope you got some inspiration, and leave your ultimate book recommendations or the books you're reading right now in the comments down below. Leave a like if you liked it, and see you soon. Bye bye!